case you don't know, we do have 430,000 members in over 190 countries. I think the UN recognizes 197 countries, so we're a little short, but we're almost there. The trick is we are the largest, professional association in the world. And so that's one of the more interesting pieces of trivia. All the little stats are down there. There are over 3 million documents available that we've got, and literally thousands of events a year. I'm part of what's called the Standards Association, and that organization specifically focuses on developing consensus, okay? And for that, we've got about 900 to 1,000 standards that are available. We've got at any one point about 20,000 people working on those in various ways, shapes, and forms. And we cover the technical areas of the IEEE, which are vast. There are 40 societies and councils. The wonderful thing about the IEEE is that it's a very, very broad-based organization. Sometimes the most frustrating thing about the IEEE is that it's a very, very broad-based organization. Most people know us for 802 and the standards that we do for wired and wireless communication. They're very well known, as well as a lot of our power standards are extremely well known in the power industry and considered very, very crucial to that. So we cover the gamut. That's part of the interesting thing when we look at AR and how it affects us is we're looking at it from a very, very broad-based perspective. So it was interesting to me when you look at OGC, they have a particular view and a particular angle that they're looking at how do we help and assist AR. With IEEE, it's a much more broad-based palette that we're examining right now. So what are we looking at right now in having these standards that we like to identify for AR? I think the point is that most of us know that standards are good and they do things for you, but where we want to drive is to start creating some valuable standards for AR. And I think the thing that I find most interesting about standards is that when it's really, really useful, most people don't even know about it. And that's really the thing that I find that a lot of people have trouble registering is that something like 802 that is ubiquitous, that every single one of you is using right now, but there's not a lot that you realize that you're doing to use that. And that's when a standard is right. If a standard is right, it should not be in your face. It should be making all of the applications and tools that we've seen demonstrated this morning in some of the examples that we've had possible. So that's what we're driving at with what we do. So over 900 standards in over 40 technical areas with all these people participating. How are we assessing AR right now? So we've been looking at it and analyzing our standards from 6 particular points of view that are shown here. And what we did is we took a look at our library of standards and projects. And so we're looking at thousands of them and saying, what do we think applies? And after a long and painful process, we identified a group of standards. And the thing I think that you'll see on this slide and the next one we show them is in these brief descriptions, there's not necessarily a stream of connection, right? They're covering a really wide variety of topics. That to me is the most fascinating thing about what we're looking at. Everything that seems like it should obviously relate, right? Systems with virtual components, okay, we get that. But then we go down into how we do things for rechargeable batteries, for cell phones, and for computers, okay? And that, it does relate, but it is definitely pulled out in a completely different field. And so for us, these are the areas that we've discovered that we think have a current high relevancy to what we're doing. So just to dig a little bit, I'm going to pull just a few of those that are off that list and go a little bit into what they do and then what we're going to be asking them right now and actually are asking them. So in certain cases, we have things that are called projects. That's right, the P's there. It's not affirmed yet as a standard. If I don't have a P, it's a standard. It's that simple. Now we're looking at real-time mobile video communications. How can you go ahead and actually have the ability to share the mobile video communications in a seamless and consistent way. This is a constant challenge, particularly in the world of mobile, and so this standard is working on those sort of collaborative surfaces to allow that mobile video connectivity. Doesn't matter what browser you're using, doesn't matter what tool you're on, what game you're playing, etc. You'll be able to have that. So this, for us, we believe AR is one of those tools. AR is one of those methodologies that's going to be taking advantage of these bidirectional services that they're standardizing in this standard. Because again, it's part of what we saw earlier. When we have this sort of fluid environment that's created through mobile, what can we do to ensure that to the user, it appears seamless, it appears connected, and it appears fruitful instead of frustrating? This is a group that we think we want to bring that into. So we looked at it, and based on those criteria above, this is where we saw it most heavily applying, particularly in terms of workflow and time. Another example is still tying in a high-quality mobile experience. This one particularly relates to the concept of time-shifted caching. And they're really exploring this concept of you deliver the mobile content by having some sort of anticipatory storage that you're using for the customer, that you can bring that work forward. So this actually exists, this is a standard. Now they're expanding on it to bring in more to it and to make it a little simpler for people to use. So again, this is one of those examples where it does impact, particularly in the sense of giving us a digital asset, okay? Something that can be utilized for that field of AR. 33.2, I actually just saw an amazing presentation on this a couple of weeks ago in Korea that showed me parts of my body that I didn't know existed. And this is really looking at 3D, particularly in the field of medical imaging. This gets back to the breadth of IEEE. We have an entire area devoted to medical health and medical health devices. And this in particular is looking at, if you're looking at 3D displays using the equipment, and in particular, here we go, mobile smart pads, smartphones. This is what doctors are using right now. They're using them in offices, they're using them in homes. They need to be able to have clear-cut, consistent rendering because you're making a judgment about what you're doing to someone based on the 3D image. It's clearly an area that ties to AR. This is something where you're going to want to be able to expand that and blow out that 3D image even more, augment it with information, make it available at the fingertips for the doctors, for the hospitals to use. This group is already defining how you're going to make that image. We're asking them to start considering AR as part of that definition. So again, physical world assets is where this one really jumps out. Ties in there. 1516 is an entire family of standards that deals with distributed modeling and simulation. Okay? How do you have the interaction between simulations? How can they work together when they're distributed over various environments? So they've got a family of standards that relate to the areas that are on the screen. And this group in particular, we think ties in also very strongly. Finally, there's another one that deals with feedback, modeling feedback. Now you've got, the distributed simulation. How are you dealing with the modeling and the feedback and the communication systems? Again, all these areas also relate to AR. They all tie in. They're all dealing with it every day. But we don't have these communities necessarily thinking about that. So what are we doing? I'm just going to blow past. I've got one more example. Okay, so what we're doing right now is a lot of development. We're looking at tools for market education and awareness programs. Again, this is public and internal to IEEE. It's in both directions, okay, that we need to help inform people. And so we're working with these groups that are out there to have them start taking their work, put a prism on top of it that says AR, and then look at their way the work refracts out of it. What changes? What's new? What's different? What's missing? Okay, for a lot of these groups, they have not thought about it. One of the things we came to realize when we're analyzing AR is that in a lot of cases, we don't necessarily need a distinct standard about that work. We need to take these groups that are already established, already there, in many cases already very well known, and throw AR into the mix. So this is something that we're going to be pushing in a lot of communities to see what has to be done. What has to be enabled? It may drive down, even way down into the stack, to things like 802 because you're talking bandwidth capabilities. So what do we need to enable and to enrich in those areas to have these things happen? So this is a huge effort for us because this is a very, very diverse community and they all speak different languages. So for us to be able to find those commonalities of approach and yet nonetheless find a specificity of application that will apply to those communities is a key part of this endeavor that we are undertaking right now to be able to expand AR out and build the tools that ultimately all of you are going to be able to use in very, very specific ways. So just again, to sort of give you a feel on that, these are some of the communities that we're identifying that we have that relate to it. The medical that I've already mentioned to you that ties in. We have a number of emergency management standards and also things like black box for car standards that are going to tie into this. Power is simply huge, and you've heard John allude to a little bit in the particular areas that they are looking at in EPRI as well, but we've got a huge area of application in IEEE that deals with power, and it is one of those areas where we see a lot of potential for AR, and that's something that we'd like to see driving down. As well into the vehicles, we have a lot going on in transportation right now that relates to things like electrification, et cetera. That ties in the same way with other groups that we bring it in and learn with. And then finally, we have an entire series of standards devoted to learning technologies. And this is part and parcel of the picture because how are we approaching how people perceive and learn about something that is now not immediate, real, and in front of them. We're augmenting, we're adding, we're transforming their world. So when we think of how we learn and the technologies that we have to be able to enable people to understand things, when we've changed their definition of the perception of that, how does that affect what they do? So these are all areas that we're going to be working on. We've actually started building some tools and making them public. The URL is there. Take a look at that, and you'll be definitely hearing more from me in the future about that area, and I hope I did that quickly enough to make my 15 minutes. Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Great. Are there any questions for Mary Lynn? Okay, we have two. Eric.
Really quickly, what's the intellectual property policy and how do you relate to ISO, ITU, ACI, WC3?
Sure. The IEEE is actually a global organization. So we've been around for about 130 years. So we actually have a number of arrangements that work with. That work with ISO, IEC, ITU, so we have partnership arrangements with all of them. So a lot of our documents have actually moved into those arenas through those partnerships. In terms of the intellectual property, what we say is that the standard, the product that we produce is IEEE's. That is copyrighted to IEEE because it has to be used broadly, etc. Contributions to it, the contribution itself is not copyrighted to IEEE. If we take things from it and incorporate them into the standard, they are. So the concept is if you go out for something that gets validated, that can be changed, massaged through the consensus process, that end result is ours, but the contribution stays with the union or company that presented it. So we don't take away something that they present to us. They have to recognize what they give us can be transformed. And so they cannot control it.
License those specifications.
That's correct. That's correct. There's a lot of licensing that goes on. We also produce a number of white papers, some that are produced under IEEE, and some of them we license. So it's giving IEEE the license to use it, but again, we don't own the IP in those cases. So it's a balance combination.
My name is Lance McKee. I'm staff writer for the Open Geospatial Consortium.
Hi.
You're talking about different communities within IEEE needing to communicate on this cross-cutting new application of AR. Well, I want to put in a plug for pi people. You know, the Greek letter pi has two vertical bars with bars across the top that connects them. What we need is people, and what IEEE needs, what the whole standards community and all their stakeholders need, is pi people. For example, a person who has knowledge of spatial issues, as we have with OGC, well, some of our members need to support a pi person who goes who has a foot in OGC and a foot in IEEE in one of, or whatever group is important for a particular standard. And we do this to some extent, but too much is left to the organizations. I think we need to call upon our members to support people who will bridge these gaps, because IEEE needs to bridge the gap to spatial. So much of AR is spatial. It's very important for all of your stakeholders to get the spatial right, and that means getting it into the world's spatial framework, and not an IEEE framework. The ITU likewise, but the ITU framework for spatial smart grid. It's all got to become connected.
Thank you. I actually agree with you on that, and I think that's part of the reason that we're trying to take this approach of going out to them and getting them interested about it, thinking about it, and excited about it. Because the only way you're going to build pies, as you mentioned them, when you're looking at, as we call it, horizontals,
Yes.
crossing all these areas, is you have to get them energized to want to serve the goal. So part of this purpose is to start to expand their thinking about it. And by being able to turn our experts into people who we can then offer and bring into these communities, so that maybe we sponsor some sort of joint event and we're getting them together, etc. Taking advantage of that is going to be the kind of thing we need to do. The first thing you need to do is to make them aware, and then the second thing is to energize them. And so that's really part and parcel of the activity as well.
Are you familiar with this initiative, the Smart Grid Interoperability now?
Oh, Lordy.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. As a matter of fact, IEEE has been strongly involved in this from the start when they did their smart grid. Interesting little story. Very short. When this started, they actually came to IEEE. When they first started all of their smart grid interoperability work to say, hey, we can participate. And they said, we're reaching out to a bunch of organizations and we'll let you know what we find. And they came back and said, yeah, we've identified all these organizations and the standards that we think apply that we need to bring in and make part of this interoperability activity. Every organization on the list that I saw had 1, 2, at best, maybe 4 or 5 standards, and IEEE had about 7. So in that area, yeah, we've been a huge participant all the way along and playing in that area. We're also doing some of the other courses you can imagine, these activities, cloud. Smart America's been a big one for us right now. Some smart cities, the other smart activities that we have, so some of that has come in as well.
Well, to follow up on my initial yes or no question, do you think this would be a good thing to create a priority action or priority action plan to organize all the various AR groups to come up with that overarching
Maybe.
I'd like to leave that for lunch.
Yeah.
That was a yes or no question.
I'm not sure. The answer is maybe, and the answer is I'm not sure they're all ready to have the discussion. And that's part of what I mean about making them excited. I think if you do it too early, people will look at it and say, I don't know. It's getting them to understand why it matters to them. It's so crucial, and that's what drives that kind of program. If you don't have that, it falls on its face at once.
I need a lot of good examples, compelling examples. They are used, and also the problems of lack of accountability. Roadmap. Okay, we should get going. Thank you. Thank you, Mary Lynn.
Okay, thank you, Christine. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Excellent. I have 2 hats. I'm in Latvia. I'm the head of Investor Cooperation and Standards in Market Cooperation. But today I shall introduce Innovation Alliance, in which I'm chairman. Chairman of Innovation Alliance. So first of all, I would like to thank Christine and Advance for Augmented Reality Community for this invitation. It's really a pleasure to be today here. Thanks, Christine. And another thing is that this is an excellent timing for this presentation because we have just recently, Innovation Alliance has revised our collaboration platform, I mean how we are operating, what is our legal framework, etc. And just 2 weeks ago we had the ILA annual plenary in San Jose, which basically decided a couple of important things for our next actions and our board and so on. Another thing which I have noticed during these 2 or 3 days when I have been here with you and OTC guys is that this, for example, topics like indoor venue maps or indoor maps, this indoor GML, city GML, etc., and this mobile location services domain vertical, I believe that they have certain similar targets what we are having in our and actually, just 1 month or 2 months ago, this indoor venue map format discussion was open in Location Alliance. We are seeing this indoor map topic as an enabler for our positioning solution. So, but all in all, without it's a navigation and positioning without a map is not very useful. So it's very critical in that sense. And of course, it's nice that I can combine the visit with OTC meetings and with your interest today here. A couple of words about our history, which is quite short. I mean, we are quite young. If I compare to this team, I understood that you are about 4 years old, and OTC is about 20 years old. So we are just about 2 years old. So we have just started in that way. We have a mission. The mission is that we are promoting the deployment of indoor location-based services in mobile environment. That is our mission. And we have, in a way, we have specified certain criteria for our activities. We are highlighting not only technical items, but we are also highlighting business items, use cases and that kind of things, and ecosystem, value chains, and so on. Technically, we have, when we, in the very beginning, when we started, we were quite much about this kind of engineer type of things in our minds. We were highlighting high accuracy, low power consumption, and mobility. But now, after 2 years, I would like to say that especially this business use case, value chain type of discussions are very much valid at the moment in our organization. And maybe just another comment which I just said to Christine this morning is that actually we started as a project or program. 2 years ago, we didn't know that we will establish this kind of formal, legally registered entity which we are today now here. And so basically we have had a certain learning curve, and now we are happy to say that we are really, let's say, industry platform which has resources and clear targets and so on. Just last week we announced press release. Why? Basically we had a couple of key messages in that message, and a couple of things were that now we have new model, meaning that we have different membership categories, charter members, contributor members, associate members, and so on. Here you can see a couple of member companies, and actually these companies are also forming a board of directors for the Innovation Alliance. And another interesting notice is that we are under IEEE ISO program, so we are actually, in that sense, collaborating very, very heavily with ISO colleagues. And maybe one extra point also from this is that our aim is to accelerate the rollout of relevant technologies for indoor positioning businesses. The individual members, of course, they have their own business targets, objectives, etc., and they will apply those things. But we would like to see this as a global deployment, volume-based deployment for indoor positioning solutions. And also we need to highlight one element that we are not STO organization. We are relying on the existing standard development bodies like OTC or ONA or Chip and so on. So we don't want to do any overlapping work, but vice versa, we would like to collaborate with you and others. And our aim is basically to describe the requirements for our use cases or for our technologies. Okay. objectives. When we started, we actually had this picture in front of our eyes, and in the middle you can see the word compatibility, basically compatibility or interoperability, etc. That kind of word is meant here. We are having use cases. Use cases are, you can see use cases as environments or applications in which the indoor positioning solutions are needed. And we are quite much use case driven, but to get some real concrete evidences that how our system solutions are working, we are having pilots, concrete pilots operated by member companies. So in location alliance itself, at least at the moment, we are not executing the pilot. So we are relying on our members, and we are hoping that the members will tell the results, share the experiences from the pilots. System architecture work, that is quite much what I would say this kind of specification type of exercise, and that is the work from which we are basically getting the inputs for the SPOs. And that has already happened, and we will continue in that area. For example, like I mentioned, this indoor map format or venue map format is that kind of exercise. We are highlighting open ecosystem. We are very willing to see as many players as possible. We are highlighting open standards, and in that respect, this is ecosystem exercise. Okay, green mobile services, especially now in the indoor environment. With this picture, I just want to maybe not go into the details, but just to say that we have still many things to be done. We are now evaluating what are really the relevant use cases, which standards are relevant for us, which technologies are the most applicable ones, and we have evidences about those things. We have ongoing activity about business models and so on. So we are in this curve, we are somewhere in the early phase in that sense. A couple of examples I have highlighted here the word example because there are so many use cases, and just listing some examples: indoor navigation, receiving directions to the right products, personalized product promotions, enhanced product placement, increased customer identification, increase in security in emergency situation, finding the precise location of assets and people. So this is not only about locating mobile phones, tablets, etc., but we can use, of course, this for the asset tracking purposes. And as you can see here from the picture, map is key for our use cases, and of course, when you are visiting those big shopping malls, supermarkets, the venue maps are really key. From this picture, actually, you can just see that what is the collaboration between the working groups in the alliance, and we have pilot working group, we have use case working group, system architecture, and promotion working group. And we have less than 100 members at the moment, and just one indication also that when we started, we had this kind of multi-agreement in place by the members. We were calling it as a promoter agreement, and we are basically terminating that agreement by the end of this month. And the 1st of April will be the first day for the new Innovation Alliance 2.0, if you say so. As said, use case working group is really analyzing the use cases, and we have analyzed situations, especially from the shopping malls, supermarkets, retail chains. We are also having clear use cases for transport hubs like airports, railway stations, and so on. And as well, you can see hospitals, university campus areas, you can see sport arenas, football stadiums, etc. I have met companies who are really interested about the hospitals, and they are already using. We have in Finland, we have one big hospital in which Wi-Fi-based position has been used a couple of years already for asset tracking purposes. I have discussed with a couple of companies who are trying to make the indoor positioning solution for really big football stadium in Spain. They have a couple of use cases, security, safety use cases, but they have also some ideas that how they could track the players even. So then we are talking about very accurate solutions really. But as you can see, when we are in the venues, there can be several use cases depending are they meant to be for consumers, or are they meant to be for B2B cases. Okay, pilot working group. As said, idea here is that there would be something very concrete, visible, and like in Nokia, we have a couple of trials in Helsinki, especially in supermarket. We have tracked the shopping trolleys, and basically the idea is that the shop owner would make all kind of analysis based on the routes when the consumers are walking with the shopping trolleys and looking for the products. Then system architecture working group, which is like I said earlier, it's this kind of engineer type of exercise. This, especially this working group has been very, very active. I would say almost from day one. I don't know what is the reason, but one reason is that we have so many engineers, and especially engineers who are interested about standards. But all in all, that has been a very active team, and we are in this team we are talking about mobile-centric indoor positioning solution, in which the mobile phone is basically the key role, and then we are talking about the asset tracking and network-centric mode, in which the network location server is basically taking care of the calculation. I believe that from this team we are able to get the concrete deliverable, white paper during the next months or so. We have planned for that, but as you know, always when you have tens of persons, tens of companies around the table, you need to agree first what you will publish and so on, and at the end it may even happen so that you will involve. But all in all, please wait for this document. We have already draft versions, and white paper hopefully will be released during the next months. And especially this group idea where we are now here, and when I have seen these OGC meetings and so on, this is the team which, if needed, will basically collaborate with the STOs. And basically this is everything what I had in my mind. This was a short introduction. Okay, good. And thank you.
Yes, Eric.
So given the cost of the infrastructure, putting the devices everywhere, is it the tail wagging the dog? Is the main application actually another communications network? And then positioning is a side effect of that? Or is it really positioning that is the main application, and maybe you can also use it as a communications network?
I'm not sure if I get it correctly, but if you are asking what is the main, is the positioning itself or is it something else?
Well, you have a device. It's expensive to put devices in buildings.
Okay.
There's possibly their network, maybe it's a mesh network. That's useful all by itself as a communications network, wireless communications network. Maybe that's much more valuable than the positioning. Is the business case more about the communications network or more about the positioning?
Okay, let's put it that way that we have several options for indoor positioning. We can actually use these Wi-Fi access points, okay, which normally you are using for the communication purposes. So basically, in that kind of environment, if you can rely on the Wi-Fi access point for the Wi-Fi-based positioning, then basically you don't need to make any extra investment. Okay, another example is that if you would like to use those, let's say, proximity Bluetooth low energy tags, for example, located in, for example, in every room, then you may need to have an extra investment, very important. But it's quite minimal. But on the other hand, you may also have a more expensive and more professional, for example, Bluetooth devices, infrastructure, which will need more money as well. Of course, if you can combine the communication and empty, it could be more feasible. Yes.
Thank you very much.